Hello and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. Today I'd like to welcome Sonal Patel. Sonal is a national award winning multimedia journalist. She is currently a senior associate editor at Power Magazine. Sonal, how are you doing today?
Very good, Raj. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on. Sonal, I'd like to kick the show off with something interesting that people might not readily know about you. So if you'd care to share.
Well, I think I don't know that I can think of anything very interesting. I think what intrigues people a lot is when I tell them that I'm a journalist and I work for the magazine, which is Power. I don't know, a lot of people aren't very familiar with our magazine. It's a very old magazine, 137 years this October, actually. Um, and it is a magazine that covers power generation of all forms, global coverage, and we talk about business and policy. And the thing about it is that I think for the most part, we're writing for a very technical audience, and it suits me very well. And I think that, there's it's an interesting aspect that people find. You rarely have journalists writing about engineering and finding engineering interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that is, usually why people are intrigued. Journalism is a fascinating occupation because you tend to have the opportunity to cover anything you so choose as long as you have this element of curiosity. And I think this obsession for detail, and so you can make a story out of anything that you observe or frankly experience. And I think um, and so when you turn that sort of skill to engineering, it becomes a whole new animal. Um, so that is what I would say.
So that is interesting because I think, you said something there and my mind kind of went to, people read articles, you read stories, you often forget that it's being written by a person, the journalists themselves.
Sure.
And so it must be interesting at dinner parties or cocktail parties when you tell people you're a journalist, especially in this day and age where being a journalist is being, questioned, talked about. What kind of reactions do you get when you tell people that you're a journalist?
Well, it depends on to whom you're speaking with, of course. I think a lot of people, you're right, there has been a lot of skepticism about journalism lately, and there has been a lot of, um, I think, a lot of distrust about what we do. And frankly, I think, it's generally the environment and the idea that information can be manipulated so easily. So people tend to think that you are sort of part of this pact of people who they willfully manipulate information.
Mm-hmm.
And the opposite, it's the opposite entirely. People, journalists, are, as in our case, we deal with a lot of details, and accuracy has to be the number one thing, because a lot of the things that you do and you write are attached to this credibility. Uh, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I think the reason that you read a story and you forget who the journalist is because you trust them intrinsically, right? And I think that is a huge responsibility. And I think you have to go, when you're writing a story. In fact, this is partly why I love working for Power, which is a magazine, is you take the time to really sift through the details to make sure that everything is just set perfectly right, and people can understand in the most clear way what it is that you are trying to convey to them. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so
So let me ask you a question about it. And sorry to interrupt you. So once you publish a story, I've seen in the past where stories, not necessarily in Power, but in other publications, have been published, and then there might be an error in reporting or perhaps a miscommunication, and then there's a conversation about retraction or correction. How do you handle those kinds of situations?
at Power, we
Mhm.
typically address them very quickly if there is something that glaring. If it's something that we dispute, then we will try to follow up and get more details as to why the dispute exists.
Mhm.
Typically, it's as simple as a typo or a miscommunication, and that's easily cleared up. But we will issue a correction at the end of every story. And if it's something that is a big detail that we've misreported, then we will publish a secondary story to explain what it was and how that error was made. So
Got you.
I think it's the same for any corporation. How do you do it at your company? Everybody makes mistakes. I think I think communication is the best way, and I think that's really the best way to being direct is the best way to get the best information. So,
To totally agree, and I think for example, like you mentioned our corporation, I think the benefit of our corporation is that our audience is probably much smaller. So if we make an error with a client, it's probably between us and the client. Whereas a publication like yours, has so many readers, it's probably a little bit more different the way you have to handle it.
yeah, I mean, you're right, and I think part of that's one of the reasons we take so much pain to make it right in the first place. But everyone, I think, understands that yeah, these types of errors happen, and people point them out, and we're grateful to our readership too, especially if there's something that we have misunderstood or misreported, and we take the pains to make it right.
And I also like to add, and please correct me if I'm wrong, one of the benefits of your magazine is that you're not trying to be on a breaking news cycle. So you have, sorry, go ahead.
No, we do. We do. Well, the thing about Power is that as much as it's a magazine, we also follow developments. So if there are news stories that need to be broken, then we do them quickly. For example, if there has been an accident or there has been a breakthrough in a policy or a judgment by the Supreme Court, then we will put it out as soon as we possibly can so that people are aware of it, because these types of stories tend to make an impact on their decisions.
Hmm.
Um, and especially if we have more details than we can convey, if it's something that's generally interesting to people that we know will garner their attention, then we will put it out as a breaking news story. Yeah.
Hmm. So you've been with Power since 2008. It's quite a while. It's 11 years. You've seen the industry landscape changed over the years. How has that changed your reporting, and what are some of the major changes you're seeing?
That's a great question. Um, I think that, when I joined Power, it was 2008, as you say, and it was right at the end of W. Bush's last year, and so it was a different time. I remember one of the first stories I wrote was about Yucca Mountain, um, and the trove of documents being delivered so that the process could get started. And of course, the repository still hasn't been built. Um, and so there are certain things that don't change. But overall, this pace of change that occurred during the Obama administration has been just mind blowing. I think the way, I think the first few years, we spent a lot of time talking about regulations and the
Hmm.
EPA's move to sort of address coal power and the regulations that happened, um, and the pushback that came from industry. And I think, and the years after the rules started coming into effect and industry started to um, adopt them, then you
Hmm.
started to see this change gradually in companies like Duke Energy and American Electric Power and Southern Company, people who, companies that had these massive generation portfolios that were majority coal fired. And all of a sudden, there has been this influx of, renewables because of the renewable portfolio standards. You've seen sort of efficiency measures on all levels. Then you had the shale gas boom, right? You had the influx, and sort of now we're seeing gluts in the market for shale. I mean, gas power. We've seen new models. Technology has just, I mean, the rate of change that has been spurred by the simple aspect of people looking for sustainable solutions and more sustainable business models has
Mm-hmm.
been just astounding. I think it's been a really interesting few years to cover this industry. So, to me, I think it never gets boring. And I think now we're seeing, decentralization. We're seeing, as a lot of sources like to point out, the digitalization part of it. And
Mm-hmm.
all of it has to do with a lot of the decarbonization measures that are going in effect all over the world. So you see, countries shaking up their generation profiles and trying new things and really spending a lot of money in battery technology and grid modernization. And it's a very different time. I think if you told someone in 2008 that this is what the future would be, I think we would all be in disagreement. So
So at Power, you get the opportunity to report on all these different technologies. Do you have any favorites?
um that's an interesting question. I don't have favorites. I cover everything equally, and with sort of the same type of zeal, because I um, I think I find them all their own unique topics. For example, this
Okay.
morning I was writing. In fact, I was creating an infographic that was basically describing how nuclear technology has evolved
Mm-hmm.
since it came since the first reactor started construction in 1954. So how did it go from, for example, Russia and the US and China and Japan and the UK to all these nations that have nuclear power plants now? And basically it evolved through a series of models that have that each has their own benefit and each have been adopted for their own reasons. And I think the nuance of covering that for every technology, be it nuclear or coal or gas, is interesting, is fascinating to me. And I think the reasons that they're adopted and the engineers who put them, you know, to work and the way they are developed and the pains that they go through to get certified or licensed or even just the funding mechanisms that come with
Mm-hmm.
it, the financing that happens for startups who are trying to push, solutions onto the market that could be, I hate to use this word because I know it's so overused, game
Go ahead and
changing,
say it. I know it
game
starts with a G, I
changing.
think.
But
Yeah.
but I think in every tiny little way, every technology that people, every idea that people have is interesting and merits coverage. So there's nothing too small, I think, for me to not pay attention
Okay.
to. I
So
am a
perhaps not a
nerd, as you probably can
you're speaking to a fellow nerd.
tell.
Daniel Jurgen's book, The Prize, one of my favorite books. I was
Yeah,
talking about it the other day, and I think I've read it twice, so 800 pages twice.
yeah. Do you have
So perhaps what you, sorry, go ahead.
do you have a specific technology that you enjoy or fuel source or?
You know, so this is where you're falling into the interviewer. See, I'm really fascinated by anaerobic digestion.
Mhm.
I just think if we can find a way to do that en masse with whether it's with trash or waste, I think that waste of value, waste of energy. It's really added new filter to the way I look at things. So whenever I see waste, I think, can we convert that to energy? So
That's
that's
interesting.
that's one that I'm very curious about. Perhaps not a favorite for you, but you've been there 11 years. Did you see a technology that came up on the horizon, let's say when you were midway through at Power, and you thought, wow, I didn't see that coming, or that one really piqued your curiosity or your nerdiness?
Hmm, that's interesting. Um, there have been so many. I think for me, the latest, I think I cover each story, generally with that same sort of fervor. But I think the story that really piqued my interest was the one day out of the blue, a spokesperson called me in 2012 and it told me basically on the phone. I think they were in the car and at Uber somewhere they were going, and they said to me, we have this brand new combustor, and it runs on supercritical carbon dioxide, and it's going to change the way that coal power and gas power is produced because it's not going to have any carbon dioxide emissions. And this was in the
Hmm.
early years. We still had the Clean Power Plan. It was still in the nascent stages in the Obama administration. There was a lot of pushback, and you would never think that there would be that much support. But even without very much federal funding, even though
Hmm.
for example, the DOE has been invested in these types of technologies, to have a private company say, we are going for it, we have the investment we need, and we're going to put out a unit for demonstration or otherwise. And of course, they're doing it, they've built it, and there isn't any word yet when it's going to be commercially online. But the
Hmm.
fact, and I'm talking about Net Power. Have you heard of this project?
I don't think I have.
It's a project in Houston. It's 50 megawatts thermal. Um, and it's very interesting because the combustor is so tiny, so it takes up a very small footprint. And it's really, sort of an innovative way of thinking about any type of fossil fuel combustion, supercritical carbon dioxide obviously can be used for a lot of different technologies. So let's see what comes out of this project, and we'll just be waiting for it. But that's the
Actually,
one.
now that you mention it, I think I did read about it in Power Magazine.
Oh, very good.
I think you had I think you had an image in there regarding it.
Yeah, it's, people are interested in it because it's a different way of doing things. And obviously, it caters to a lot of different fuel types. And these types of things generally, they're sort of come out of the box. And
Hmm.
it's not an evolutionary technology. So it's kind of hard for people to understand what it is and what the impact will be. So, um, but yeah.
Well, I'll look for the story on it.
Yeah, thank you. I think we published one, I think it was in April. So we have a series of articles trying to explain exactly what it is. And,
Got you.
stay tuned for updates.
I will. So one of the things I like to explore on this podcast is the why behind people are doing what they do.
Mhm.
So what drove you, what motivated you to join Power and stay with it this long? What's the why behind why you do what you do?
I think that the reason that I stay at Power is because I think I am a person driven by curiosity. And I have an almost obsessive quest for details, and I enjoy fleshing out an idea. And I know I could probably do that in any outlet, but Power has obviously the I guess the scope of coverage in this industry, which I find fascinating and is in a state of flux. Um, I think for the most part, the reason that you go into magazine work is because you can talk to a lot of different people to
Hmm.
flesh out a single idea. And the insights that you come away with are just, everybody is different. And even the small things or the big things that they do, from the CEOs to the plant operators, they have insights. And even if they're unrelated, or they're completely related to the subject at hand, I think you tend to really value perspective. Do you understand what I'm trying to
Hmm.
say? Is that you tend to see the world in different angles, and it gives you an appreciation for life, because you it's like every even mundane thing that you can possibly do, there's someone else who can have a different experience of what it is that they're um, finding or finding valuable. And I
Hmm.
think that gives your, sort of your thought, your ideas more quality, and it generally makes them just much more enjoyable. So I'm trying to express this sense of joy that you find in in reporting and actually talking to people who have extremely different ideas from you, you know.
I totally agree with you. In fact, as you were talking, I thought to myself, as someone that's also insatiably curious, very rarely do I come across something that, to use your word, is or do I find mundane once you really start investigating it.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is also, as a journalist, you have to be objective. So I have ideas.
How do you maintain objectivity?
How? Well, it's key. The key lesson there is that you cannot walk around with assumptions. Assumptions generally tend to become concrete in a lot of people's minds, and they go through their lives making decisions based on these, easily outdated assumptions. It's
Mm-hmm.
in an industry that is in the state of flux as ours is. um, you you cannot have assumptions about anything, not the statistics, not the type of technology, not the costs, because things are so fluid and they change so easily. So, and the reason I say that is that the assumptions, when you challenge your assumptions, when basically when you're talking to anyone you interview, you are trying to make sure that what it is that they're saying to you is credible. And so you have to ask them these very pointed questions, and at the same time you are trying to learn from them, so you have to try to not assume that you know any more than you do. And I think you go into it with a lot of humility and you come back out of it extremely rewarded. So it's
So, you mentioned pointed questions. Um, have you ever had times when people have become defensive and perhaps even maybe a little volatile?
all the time. But generally, they're typically the people who have to answer to a lot of reporters and are
Mm-hmm.
generally, sort of annoyed by reporter questions.
Mm-hmm.
Most people that I speak to are usually one on one. When there's a press conference and there's a barrage of questions from reporters, can be sometimes demanding, and I think that sometimes it is our job because it is our job to keep public officials accountable.
Mm-hmm.
When you find this type of pushback, you have just a little space or a little bit of time to get the question. I think I understand why people can be a little bit more hostile when they ask their questions. But generally, you try to be as courteous as you possibly can to anyone from whom you are seeking information.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's part of the job. I think the people who are trying to not give you the information that you are seeking, and obviously you have your ways to either find that information or explain why it's difficult to get it. So
I,
um,
I, I can't imagine what it would be like, but I'm sure you handle it very well.
I think you do
So,
very well. You are quite an interviewer.
well,
um,
I appreciate the compliment.
yeah.
So, power
Hmm.
in general. Let's say the next 5 years, you have let's call it a murky crystal ball at best.
Hmm.
How do you see the landscape changing from a
Hmm.
generation standpoint,
I
technologies?
I disagree with you that it's murky. I think
Even better, I was giving you an out. Go ahead, crystal ball. People
I,
lay money on this. Here's where to invest. Listen very, very carefully.
after this whole speech that I gave you about challenging assumptions, right? So, like, see, let's just go with it. Um, well, I think that there is kind of a trajectory that we are seeing more and more, and I think more so than ever. The one thing that everyone says right now, the business community, because we have an administration that the regulations are fluid and all over the world, sort of, I think there is a definitive I think there's this path that has been cut out toward decarbonization, and you can see it. The other, I mean, and I don't want to keep repeating things you've probably heard over and over with digitalization. We have an event that we put out at Power. It's called the Connected Plant Conference,
Okay.
and what we do there is we explore digitalization at power plants, and how technology is changing the way we run our plants. And it's, I mean, big and small, the way that data can be collected and used, and it's done in so many different ways, and the way it's done on trading levels, on market levels. It's done for performance optimization. It's done for transmission. It's done in there's, I don't think that there's sort of we're not going back, right? Digitalization is the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to think the same of decarbonization, because I think that I think that renewables have made they've made a main road, and I think that people are adopting them, and for good reason, whether it is just for the environment, or just for efficiency, or just because it's easier to use because it's a decarbonized source of energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think those are two definite. And the other I mean, I can't tell you how the market's going to work, because the markets are extremely complex right now. There's a lot of there are a lot of issues that are still under review at FERC, for example. The EPA is looking at a lot of regulations. So it's smart for businesses to kind of try to forge their own paths.
Mm-hmm.
And while all this uncertainty is happening, they have to make some type of business direction. And to me, from everything I've read, it seems like the environmental, the social, that part, that the EGS governance, that part of,
Correct. The ESG, right?
right. They've all, I think they're moving toward more responsibility, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's going to be quite an interesting 5 years. Um, what are your projections? I would be interested to hear. What do you think? What do you think is?
I am in, like you said, I'm a full on learning mode. I don't have projections. I'm excited. I'm excited for personal reasons. I have three young daughters that I absolutely adore,
Mhm,
and whatever we can do as company, community, individuals to make the world better is I'm on board. So that's what I see, and that's what I say, is that if someone has a good idea out there, and we can get on board, and to your point about the ESG or triple bottom line, if we can make money, be profitable while doing good in the world, and I don't see an option. I think that's the way to go.
mhm,
So
mhm.
that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Um, if there's one piece of advice you would share with the audience, what would it be?
Well, I think I think that I think that when you read a news story, I think try to. It's generally this idea of generalized ideas, and this is the reason that you read and you talk to people, right? I think you try to flesh out. My advice would generally be to try to flesh out your thoughts, your ideas. Explore. Try and see um, the other sides of the issue.
Hmm.
I think that there it's generally we're moving towards uncomfortable polarization, and I if you were to ask me, in fact, I've been contemplating for some time about writing an article about partisanship and environment and energy, and I think it has no place in it. Generally, I think that
Hmm.
the reason that sort of those ideas seep into this type of business is because people tend to to exploit generalizations. And so
Hmm.
I think, my advice is always closer scrutiny, and just try and educate yourself on the issues. And I mean, and honestly, and this is the type of business that I'm in, and we try our best to help you. Do you understand what I mean? It's just
Hmm. I love the idea of trying to see the other side. And I think, along with that, people should perhaps pause for a moment after they read something to digest it rather than, just jumping to conclusions. I think one of the things you touched on earlier is about challenging assumptions. And I think that's very important too. So I
Mhm,
really appreciate that. And I agree with you regarding the polarization and the partisanship. So totally agree with you.
mhm. Thank you.
So is there any last thoughts you have for the audience, Sonal?
No, I think I'm curious, I think the thoughts that I would have is, please provide your feedback to us, the editors, and anyone that you find writing, anybody you hear talking at a conference. Please go ahead and share your ideas, and ask your questions, because questions are where, sort of, I think, questions really fuel this sense of expanding an idea. So the more we have of that, I think the better that we can help cover this industry, and dispel these generalizations, and give people sort of the information that they need. So
Well, I'll put your email address as a link to this podcast. And if anyone out there has any breaking news, wants to engage in dialogue, or wants to be a whistleblower, feel free to contact Sonal
yeah,
with your news. And I'm sure she'll be able to, you know, give you some fair coverage at Power Magazine.
thank you.
Sonal, I'd like to thank you for your time today. And I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Okay, thank you very much. What an opportunity.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.